And ever since, we've been seeing a bit of a slowdown and a pullback in terms of what investors are interested in. There's been an increase in interest rates, which means that the alternatives for investors to put money into venture capital firms are looking better. So there's less money flowing into venture capital, where you have the likes of Silicon Valley Bank and First Republic and so on, that had very strong ties to the venture community and the venture capital community, which just generally makes everybody nervous. Look, I think raising capital is not an easy job. So I'm a strategy and finance consultant. I started my career in technology consulting at Accenture. I then joined a couple of strategy consulting firms that were bought by Oliver Wyman. And following which I became an independent, working with primarily startups, growth companies, corporate finance firms, venture capital firms, family offices, but also innovation and ventures teams at larger companies. And I've been doing that for maybe the past 12 years now, working in a range of sectors, primarily tech. So fintech, edtech, health tech have been sectors that I've had a lot of experience in, as well as media and entertainment. More recently, I joined the sort of independent talent pool, shall we say, of ReachX as a senior advisor, where I'm working with two fairly promising early stage fintech companies on strategic planning and capital raising Series A. So I think it's fairly safe to say that we've been seeing a strong pullback or slowdown across the investment landscape. To be very honest with you, we're advisors, we work with startups, we work with investors, but frankly, there are economists and venture capital investors that would be much better placed to articulate what's going on than I am. But what I can tell you is, generally, the sentiment is that there was a period of sort of very high growth, euphoria almost, and lofty valuations following the pandemic that somewhat culminated round about last summer. And ever since, we've been seeing a bit of a slowdown and a pullback in terms of what investors are interested in. And I think this has been compounded by a few macroeconomic factors that, that again, many people will talk about much better than me, but sort of at a bird's eye view, there's been constant talk of recession, which makes investors nervous because, how will the startups fare in a recession? There's been an increase in interest rates, which means that the alternatives for investors to put money into venture capital firms are looking better. So there's less money flowing into venture capital. There's, a sort of consumer slowdown to some extent, which affects consumer businesses, which is due to the cost of living crisis. And then all of this sort of culminated in the last few months with the banking crisis in the US, where you have the likes of Silicon Valley Bank and First Republic and so on, that had very strong ties to the venture community and the venture capital community, which just generally makes everybody nervous. And so you have this sort of nervousness in the markets and a general retrenchment from risk, so lower risk appetite, and that sort of trickles down the investment value chain all the way down to Series A and seed, where investors are sort of, really pulling back. And the conversations that we've been having, or some of the responses that I've had, are quite simply, look, we like it, we would invest, but we're worried that the company can get enough traction to raise the next round, or we're worried that maybe in the next round capital doesn't come. And so the result is that at the early stages, investors are pulling back because they're worried that capital won't come at the later stages. So this is generally, I guess, the environment that we're seeing. Look, I think raising capital is not an easy job. It's a job that a lot of people think is going to be straightforward. There's a lot of VC out there. There's a lot of investors. I've got a great idea. I'm going to go out and raise capital. In general, it's not an easy job. The more effort, the more research, the more you target investors and really get to know them, The more you do your legwork, the better the chances of having a successful and a great capital raise. In the current market, it's even harder. So a lot of, as I was saying earlier, a lot of investors are pulling back or slowing down or have a lower appetite for risk, or are looking simply for the fundamentals. You know, they want to see traction, they want to see the metrics. And so it's generally even harder now. So there's no easy answer. There's no easy way to raise capital. And the general rule is it takes effort. It takes understanding what you have, how it fits in terms of what investors are looking for. Investors are looking for a return on investment, and they're looking for things that are extraordinary. And I mean, without getting into too much detail about every investor is different, they have different approaches, different preferences, different styles. So I don't really want to give a generalistic view of investors, but they have to make a return. They are investing either for themselves or on behalf of their limited partners, and they have to make a return. So they're looking for things that will make a significant return, primarily VCs, because they have to make up for, the startups that won't make a return. So they're looking for a return. And so that means really understanding what you have, really being able to articulate and positioning it, and then doing all the research of finding the right investors. Now, broadly, I think we can put that process into two buckets. There's sort of the very early stage, pre-seed, seed, concept stage, or pre-product or pre-launch or pre-product market fit. There are various ways of characterizing it. And then there's the later stage, so Series A, Series B onwards, where you have product market fit and you're really focusing on growing your customers, growing your revenues, growth. In the early stages, your first port of call is friends and family, people who know you, who believe what you can offer, what you can do, who are really ready to place a bet on you. And then there's, business angels. There are other forms of finance. I mean, obviously there's government support. There's a 25K government-backed loan in the UK that people can apply to. There are other such schemes in other countries in Europe. But really, it's about those first few connections that are going to help you get off the ground. I would say that at that early stage, so pre-seed, seed, a huge differentiator is getting onto an accelerator. And the reason for that is that, and we've worked with companies that are on accelerators and that are not on accelerators. And what tends to happen is that the accelerator is a platform for the company to gain visibility and to have that extra credibility of having been selected. There are a range of accelerators. Some are much more reputable than others, but the reality is that startups get exposure and get momentum. And so when we get involved with a company that has been through an accelerator or is in an accelerator, we are building on that momentum. Whereas a company that has no momentum, we are starting from scratch, or the company is starting from scratch, and it's much harder. I think from Series A onwards, then, or from later stage investment, then typically the first port of call is venture capital investors, and there's a whole range of venture capital funds. They're very well documented. The BVCA or the EVCA, European Venture Capital Association, British Venture Capital Association, are good databases of all the venture capital firms out there. There are obviously databases like Crunchbase and PitchBook, which have different levels of paid access that companies can access to find out which investors are doing what. The main point is that at this stage, it's really about the research, understanding the investors, knowing which ones make sense, and getting in front of the right ones. This is the point, I think, so Series A, Series B, where having an advisor on board can be extremely helpful. It takes enormous effort to run a capital raising process. And it's all the more successful, the more research is put into it, the more effort is put into it. And having a partner that can run that process, run the research, analyze the investors, put the company in front of the right investors, can really take the weight off the management team and allow the management team really to focus on building a great business. And I think so here's my plug. This is really where ReachX comes in and takes that weight off the hands of the management team. It's a difficult question to answer, again, because as I said earlier, every investor is different, and it's very hard to put everyone in one big sort of common sort of approach. And they're not just different in terms of their approach or type and preferences, but also in terms of their style. And very often, an investor will have a published preference, but venture out of that preference for particular reasons. And so it's very hard to have this kind of blanket approach. There is, however, a fairly consistent sort of rule of thumb sets of criteria. And again, as you say, we can divide them into sort of early stage versus late stage. At the earlier stage, it is assumed that the company does not have revenue, potentially does not have customer traction or significant customers. And therefore, it's very hard to establish, financial metrics or measurable metrics that can be extrapolated and then valuations built upon. And so at the early stages, investment tends to be very much focused on a smaller set of criteria that revolve around the opportunity and the team, essentially. And the opportunity is, is this big enough as a market to be addressing? Overall, is this a big enough opportunity to even be considering? Is the pain that we are solving a pain that is worth solving and that customers are willing to pay for? And so really, in essence, is this big enough and does it make sense? And then the team, do they have the experience, the capability, the credibility, the motivation to deliver that opportunity? And so really it boils down to the opportunity and the team to a large extent. At the later stages, so from Series A, B onwards, it is assumed that the company has launched, it has achieved product market fit, it's able to start to demonstrate traction of either customer growth or revenues, very much dependent on their business model. And here the metrics will vary a lot, depending on whether it's direct to consumer or software as a service or deep technology or med tech devices. It will vary a lot. But in essence, the company has metrics that can be evaluated financially and extrapolated, and on which a forward-looking set of evaluations can be made. In reality, what the investor is looking for is a trajectory, is looking to look at the metrics and to establish a trajectory that demonstrates that further down the road, it will achieve a certain valuation that supports the capital that it is raising now and later. So really, it's opportunity and team, and then financial metrics and traction. I recently worked alongside a family office investor who is very active in early stage VC. And he was very emphatic about the concept of founder market fit. So we talk a lot about product market fit, which is there a market for your product? And are people willing to pay for it, or does it solve a problem, right? But he was very emphatic about founder market fit. And it makes a lot of sense, because it's really about, at the early stages particularly, about whether the founders have the experience, understanding, and wherewithal really to fit with the market that they are addressing, in the same way that the product has to. And arguably, at that early stage, that is far more important than the product market fit itself, which you can prove later. Sort of little exploited area of really piggybacking on your existing investors. They are the number one ambassador of the company. They are vested. They have an interest in supporting the company to raise finance. So it's not you, the startup, that leads the process. It's the investors that go and create a syndicate and raise capital for the startup.